Thomas, I agree to your terms. I'll sell you all my shares and leave W Group, never to return. Billy stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, his voice cold as he spoke to the person on the other end. But I want 100 million. You've thought it through? Thomas's deep voice held a hint of mockery, as if he'd expected this. But how will you convince Tiffany? Don't worry. By the time she finds out, she won't be able to find me. Billy's eyes were filled with determination. Thomas chuckled, satisfied. I'll have my lawyer prepare the documents ASAP. I hope you keep your word. Naturally. Billy hung up and heard the office door open. The familiar footsteps told him, even without turning, that it was Tiffany. She closed the door and locked it, a practiced routine just like countless times before. Her heavy breathing beside him felt like countless daggers stabbing into Billy's heart. Memories flooded back like a tide. 7 years ago, Tiffany was the sole heiress to W Group, and he was just a temporary model for one of its art galleries. The first time he saw Tiffany, he had just finished a 3-hour modeling session. Holding one pose for so long had made him stiff. His jacket, clutched loosely, slipped and fell to the floor. Amidst the teasing glances of others, she bent down, picked it up, and gently draped it over his shoulders. The sunset that day was beautiful, casting a soft glow on her striking, elegant features, adding a touch of gentleness. Love, along with that warmth, grew wildly. He hadn't dared to hope he could truly get close to her. She had Charles by her side, her one that got away, a renowned painter since he was 15, someone who was truly her equal. They were from families with long-standing ties, childhood sweethearts, an innocent pair, the perfect match in high society. Until 5 years ago, when Tiffany, trying to help Charles secure a piece of land, embroiled herself and W Group in a serious legal dispute. Tiffany was taken away by the police from their wedding venue. W Group was on the brink of bankruptcy. Charles silently slipped off his suit, took jewelry worth billions, and vanished without a trace. Tiffany was investigated for 6 months and eventually released without charges. But W Group was in dire straits. Relatives from W Group's branch families did everything they could to carve up the company. Suddenly, Tiffany was abandoned by everyone. It was Billy who stayed by her side. He was the one who begged Thomas for help. No one knew that he had stood outside Thomas's mansion for an entire snowy night. No one knew that the next day he almost died from acute pneumonia. From then on, Billy became Tiffany's right-hand man. When Tiffany needed investment, he sought out resources, enduring humiliation and forced drinking at countless dinners. When Tiffany needed projects, he pounded the pavement in his dress shoes, visiting industry tycoons. When Tiffany needed comfort, he was there for their passionate, desperate encounters. Many times, like now, Tiffany's pants were still perfectly on, while Billy looked like a vine battered by a storm, utterly disheveled. He truly loved Tiffany. Even though their status difference meant they couldn't publicly be boyfriend and girlfriend, even if one day they married and it couldn't be known by everyone, he was willing. But all these fantasies shattered a week ago when he saw the chat history on Tiffany's computer messaging app. That morning, when Tiffany left home, she had a bit of a stomach ache. He'd specially made some light food, disguised as takeout, and brought it to the office. Tiffany wasn't there, but her computer's messaging app kept pinging. It was a chat with her bestie. Tiffany, what's your plan? You're stringing Billy along to work his butt off for you. While on the other hand, you're planning to redo your wedding with your first love, to relive memories? Aren't you afraid Billy will be heartbroken when he finds out? First love? Charles? Billy had indeed heard Charles was back, and with a bad reputation. Billy had naively thought that since Charles had amnesia, he wouldn't get involved with Tiffany again. But redoing the wedding? What was that about? His face instantly turned deathly pale. He stared uncontrollably at the computer screen, refusing to look away, like a shameless voyeur. The next second, Tiffany's cold, indifferent reply appeared. He's just some gig model. It's only because he's smart, capable, and looks a bit like Charles that I gave him 3% of W Group's shares. You don't think I'd actually marry him, do you? I'd be the laughingstock of our circle. Charles and I grew up together. We were always meant to be. Besides, I can't bear to see him so lost, not even knowing who he is. I get it. You're not just trying to help him recover his memories. You're trying to get back together. Tiffany, aren't you going to tell Billy? He's been waiting for you. This isn't right. Mind your own business. The less he knows, the better for him. Then, a hurried message. Gotta go. Charles's gallery is in trouble. I'm gonna check it out. A series of teasing emojis from the friend followed. Billy clutched the lunchbox he'd prepared, feeling like he was about to collapse, as humiliated as if he'd been stripped naked. So Tiffany had never liked him. She was with him only because he resembled Charles, only because he could help her. All of Billy's hopes were crushed in that moment. It felt as if all the blood had been drained from his body. After a long silence, he made his decision. He threw the lunchbox into the hallway trash can. He would sell all his W Group shares and the house filled with memories of Tiffany. He would cut all ties, leave this place and leave her. He and Thomas had already settled the stocks. All that was left was the house full of memories, and he had booked a flight for 10 days later. After a while, Tiffany finished. She buried her head in his neck, her breathing rapid but steadying. Billy, struggling to control his trembling body, pushed away her arms that were wrapped around his waist and straightened himself. What's wrong? Tiffany's voice was still a little hoarse from their encounter. Nothing. It's over, so we should clean up. Billy calmly buttoned his last button. And between them, it was also time to end completely. Tiffany didn't come home that night. Before bed, Billy received a message from a W Group hotel employee, saying there was a serious dispute at the hotel that needed his attention. Worried that the staff might be in trouble, Billy hurried out. When he arrived at the hotel, he saw the slightly flustered hotel manager blocking his way. Billy, what are you doing here? I heard there was a dispute, so I came to check. Where are the troublemakers? Billy looked around. The hotel was calm and orderly, nothing unusual. The hotel manager subtly blocked Billy's path, forcing a smile. What dispute? So late, Billy. You should go home and rest. Okay. Billy was a bit puzzled but turned to leave. Just as he turned, he heard a familiar voice. Do you like it? It was Tiffany's voice. He couldn't mistake it. He looked at the somewhat embarrassed hotel manager and forcefully walked towards the hotel's most luxurious ballroom. Peeking through the crack in the door, he could clearly see Charles in a white suit, standing in a beautifully decorated wedding venue, elegant and ethereal, like an untainted prince. Purple Salamanca orchids surrounded him, creating a romantic and beautiful scene. Tiffany stood below the stage, gazing at the man on stage with eyes full of affection. Tiffany, I love it. So beautiful here. Is this our wedding venue? Charles twirled around, excited as a child. Tiffany nodded without hesitation. Yes, I had it specially decorated in advance. If there's anything you don't like, they can change it. This is perfect. Charles suddenly lowered his head, looking a bit guilty, fidgeting with the hem of his clothes. But I don't remember anything from before. Will Tiffany blame me? No, with me here, you'll remember. Charles timidly looked up at Tiffany. But those people causing trouble at the gallery said a lot of nasty things. Did I do something bad to Tiffany before? Will you forgive me? Silly. No matter what you do, I won't blame you. Tiffany's gaze was incredibly gentle. Don't think about those things. I'll take care of it. Charles's eyes lit up. He looked as nimble as a fairy, twirling excitedly in the sea of flowers again. But he accidentally stepped on a fallen petal and fell. Tiffany's expression changed drastically. She immediately rushed over and helped him up. How could you be so careless? Where did you fall? Charles clutched his ankle, looking innocent. I think I twisted my ankle. I'll take you to the hospital. Tiffany helped Charles up and walked briskly towards the ballroom exit, even kicking the door open impatiently. She never noticed Billy standing behind the door. Billy leaned against the wall, his knee throbbing from being hit by the ballroom door. The bitterness inside him spread throughout his body. He watched Charles leaning on Tiffany, their eyes meeting. Charles's lips curled into a triumphant smirk. What a convenient amnesia. If he truly had amnesia, how could he have schemed so meticulously to make Billy witness this scene? Tiffany probably never imagined that the so-called amnesia was just Charles's excuse to get back to her. Billy suddenly remembered when he was struggling alongside Tiffany. He'd been turned away by investors time and time again. His dress shoes, worn all day, had rubbed his heels raw. Tiffany had been so angry she wanted to confront those investors. He had tugged at her sleeve, shaking his head indifferently, saying it didn't matter. But she had been deeply pained, saying that one day, everyone would know he was Tiffany's most important man, and he would never suffer any injustice again. That day, she carried him on her back, his dress shoes in her hand, and walked a very long way. After getting home, she carefully treated his wounds, her sincere, clear eyes misty with self-blame. That night, she held his arm as if it were a precious treasure. And now, Tiffany, wearing the diamond-studded Rolex he had custom-made for her birthday, was holding her first love and walking past him without a glance. After a while, Billy, under the hotel manager's evasive gaze, silently walked home, lit some calming incense for himself and closed his eyes. The next morning, Billy went to the office early as usual, not to work, but to pack his things. In the past, when he and Tiffany were struggling, she always liked to crash at his place. They would work late on proposals, review processes, and rush data. When they were exhausted, they would sleep in each other's arms in the small break room behind the office. Billy had long grown accustomed to the office being filled with Tiffany's scent and belongings. He himself would subconsciously add some couple's items, as if to prove their intimacy. Even when faced with the prying and questioning eyes of company employees, he didn't care. Billy packed all of Tiffany's things into a suitcase, ready to throw them out, when Tiffany arrived. Seeing the office devoid of her presence, Tiffany frowned. Still mad? Mad enough to throw out all my stuff? That day, I just couldn't help myself. Don't you miss me? She affectionately caressed his neck. That day, she knew he was unwilling, but he could never stay angry with her for long. Billy shook his head. Thomas never likes us being too close. Let's just put these things away for now to avoid gossip. Tiffany didn't suspect anything. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Billy's shoulders, resting her chin on his shoulder with a hint of fatigue. His body tensed for a moment, then quickly relaxed. You know, my grandfather doesn't approve of your background. I'll convince him as soon as possible. Just wait for me a little longer. Once I convince him, we'll go public. I'll give you a grand wedding, okay? Tiffany tried to soothe him. Okay, I understand. Billy's tone was calm. He was an orphan and had once been a gig model. Thomas indeed looked down on him and felt he wasn't good enough for Tiffany. But after Charles had ditched her at the altar and disappeared, Thomas had also forbidden Tiffany from contacting Charles again. Yet now, not only were they in contact, but Tiffany was also preparing a new wedding for him. One could imagine how much explaining and maneuvering Tiffany would have to do afterwards. It turned out there was no difficulty or impossibility, only whether she was willing or not. Seeing Billy wasn't throwing a tantrum, Tiffany didn't overthink it. My Billy is the best. Billy gave a faint, indifferent smile. The house Billy and Tiffany owned was bought together. Tiffany chose the location. The scenery was nice, but it was expensive and hard to sell. Billy gave up years of appreciation value to entrust Thomas with finding a buyer within 3 days. He was just waiting for the contract to be signed to get the money. He had thought Tiffany wouldn't be back recently, but unexpectedly, she returned, and with a dejected-looking Charles. After storming in, Tiffany scrutinized Billy with a probing gaze, then said with conviction after a moment, "You're the one who sent people to trash Charles's gallery, weren't you?" "What?" Billy's eyes widened. "Tiffany." Charles pulled at Tiffany's arm. "Are we misunderstanding? Billy seems like a kind person. He wouldn't do such things." "Tiffany, don't accuse him wrongly." Charles glanced at Billy, a flash of triumph quickly hidden. Billy lowered his gaze, knowing full well. "Billy." Tiffany took a deep breath, her voice laced with disappointment. "Charles and I are childhood sweethearts. No matter what happened before, I don't want to see anyone hurt him." Even if you're jealous, you can't do something like this. It's illegal. Billy found it laughable. Years ago, Tiffany was imprisoned and investigated for a full 6 months because of Charles's family. She went from a golden child to almost a prisoner. When he saw Tiffany again, the person who used to shine had dull, numb eyes. When interacting with people, she habitually lowered her head. Her pride had been worn down during those 6 months. Afterwards, it was proven that Charles was not unaware of the situation but shifted all the blame onto Tiffany to protect his family's assets and honor. Billy still remembered that shortly after Tiffany was released, she had nightmares every night, never sleeping soundly. She drank countless bottles of cheap liquor she would never normally touch, just to forget those 6 months. Now, with Charles claiming amnesia and remembering nothing, Tiffany could forget everything and start over with him. I didn't do it. Billy chuckled self-deprecatingly. Tiffany, you never mentioned Charles was back, nor that you two were still in contact. So where would my jealousy come from? Billy, you don't seem surprised to see me at all. Charles blinked his innocent, large eyes, his hands still timidly clutching Tiffany's arm. Could the evidence Tiffany has be real? Evidence? The people who trashed the gallery are at the police station. If Charles wants to press charges, you'll inevitably be punished. Tiffany's expression tensed. Then you'll have even more of a stain on your record. A stain? Did she mean his past as a gig model? Billy smiled bitterly. When he was by Tiffany's side back then, she had held his hand and said that being a gig model was also a way to earn an honest living, that he was no less than anyone else. Now, Billy felt utterly exhausted and said no more. So, what do you want to do? Send me to the police station? Tiffany didn't speak. Charles, beside her, said understandingly, actually, the gallery's losses weren't significant, just a few paintings. If Billy is willing to return a few paintings to me, this matter can be resolved. The paintings were destroyed. How could they be returned? How could the matter be resolved? Billy instinctively felt that what Charles was about to say wouldn't be what he wanted to hear. Billy, your physique is so perfect, and you used to be a model. How about I paint a few portraits of you? We can display them in my gallery later. I believe many people will like them. Charles's eyes sparkled like stars, looking as innocent as an untainted artist. Billy's gaze met Tiffany's, but she subtly avoided it. The quiet room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. His chest felt tight, countless images flashing through his mind. Because he had once been a model, when he was helping Tiffany rebuild her career, he had been humiliated countless times at dinner parties. People had brazenly asked him to model, their lewd gazes making their intentions obvious. At that time, Tiffany had furiously smashed her wine glass, stood in front of him, and solemnly declared to everyone that Billy would never again be a model for public display. He was her treasured darling. From then on, Tiffany worked harder than ever, until no one at dinner parties dared to mention his past. Billy's eyes reddened, but a smile played on his lips. He took off his jacket and threw it on the sofa. What does Charles want to paint? Is this okay? Does it show my sincerity enough? The heating in the room was on full blast, yet he felt an unprecedented cold, as if he were back on that snowy night, waiting outside Thomas's villa. Charles, as if frightened by Billy's intensity, hid behind Tiffany and said nothing. He knew Charles wasn't satisfied. Charles had come today to humiliate him. How could he be so easily pleased? Billy's smile didn't falter. He continued undressing until only a thin undershirt remained, revealing the faint, lingering marks of intimacy from a few days ago under his alluring collarbone. Charles's lowered eyes flashed with resentment and jealousy. Enough, Tiffany said sharply. Charles didn't mean that, didn't he? Billy clutched his clothes tightly, stubbornly maintaining his smile, though his eyes couldn't help but redden. I, on the other hand, think Charles isn't satisfied yet. Won't Tiffany feel sorry for him? Tiffany's expression changed abruptly. What nonsense are you talking about? I just don't want you to get caught up in some inescapable lawsuit. I didn't mean to humiliate you. Why do you have to debase yourself? Tiffany's words sounded nice, but each one pierced Billy's heart. Debase himself? Wasn't it she who brought Charles to his home, relentlessly causing trouble? Wasn't it Charles who made the request, and she who tacitly approved the humiliation? How did it become his self-debasement when it came out of her mouth? In the end, it was just that Tiffany didn't love him enough. Because she didn't love him, she didn't care if he was humiliated. Billy's body trembled, the smile on his lips desolate and distant. Tiffany subconsciously started to step forward but was pulled back by Charles tugging at her clothes. Tiffany, if Billy doesn't want to, let's just forget it. My foot. Charles bent down and rubbed his ankle. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? Tiffany's gaze shifted back to Charles. I think I've been standing too long. My ankle hurts a bit. Before Charles could finish, Tiffany turned. I'll take you home. Tiffany walked quickly, even bumping into Billy's shoulder as she passed him. Knocking the clothes he clutched tightly from his hand. She was completely different from the person who had once draped a coat over him. Billy faced Thomas with an unprecedented calm. In their hands were the signed share transfer documents and the property sales agency agreement. He got the reasonable price he wanted. In 3 days, he could board the plane and leave this place. Thomas was very pleased with his sensibleness. He walked out of the office with him, but just as the office door opened, they heard the sound of party poppers. Festive colored streamers fluttered down, some landing on Thomas's shoulder. Nonsense, Thomas scolded. This is an office. You're not working. What are you doing? Playing house? Grandpa, what are you doing here? Tiffany explained, somewhat surprised. Billy has been by my side for so many years. I've decided to promote him to be the official company vice manager. The new office is all ready. Thomas snorted. New office? I don't think he'll be needing it. Grandpa, what do you mean by that? Tiffany's puzzled gaze swept over Thomas and Billy. Because Billy interrupted Thomas. Thomas, I'll see you out. After Billy saw Thomas off, Tiffany grabbed his wrist tightly. What did Grandpa mean? Why did he suddenly come over? What did you two talk about? Nothing. Billy shook his head. Same old story. I don't care. You've been wronged. Tiffany naturally assumed Thomas had brought up Billy's background again, disapproving of their relationship. She gripped Billy's shoulders. Come see the new office I prepared for you. Billy was pushed along by Tiffany, but he could clearly hear the surrounding staff gossiping. Tiffany's really something, not only giving Billy shares but also promoting him. Vice manager, second only to the top. What else could she give him? The position of husband? Billy clings to Tiffany. Even in the office he's willing to go all out. Isn't it just for the husband spot? But he doesn't think, how could a gig model marry into a wealthy family? People shouldn't be too greedy. Tiffany excitedly pushed open the door to a brand new office. Oblivious to the surrounding gossip, she asked, Look, do you like it? Looking at the furnishings in the new office, it was indeed luxurious, but not to Billy's taste. The art on the walls was what Charles liked. You don't have to do this. Why not? Tiffany looked him seriously in the eyes. It's because of you that I was able to reclaim my position as CEO of W Group. You were with me every step of the way as I climbed to the top. Now I'm with you, helping you climb even higher. Isn't that good? Was this her way of comforting him or compensating for her guilt? Billy took a deep breath, suppressing the exhaustion in his heart. If he didn't want to cause trouble in these last few days, he wouldn't bother playing along with Tiffany. He knew Tiffany too well. If she knew he was leaving, she would try desperately to stop him, not out of love, but out of habit, and because he was useful to her. Billy. Charles appeared behind him, seemingly out of nowhere, holding a large bouquet of Salamanca orchids, offering them to Billy. This is my promotion gift for you. Charles winked playfully. Last time I meant no harm. I just thought you were as beautiful as a muse, capable of inspiring me. That's why I did that. It's my fault for not knowing it was offensive. Charles said with a smile. My uninvited presence today is my apology. Okay? These are Salamanca orchids. Their purple is the softest and most romantic, a perfect match for you. Billy, do you like them? Salamanca orchids? Billy looked at the flowers, his eyes instantly turning cold. Salamanca orchids were notoriously expensive and difficult to cultivate. Most flower shops didn't carry them. They had to be air freighted from abroad. Charles presented a large bouquet. It was obvious where these flowers came from. Meeting Charles's provocative gaze, Billy said flatly, "I don't need them. Thank you." Billy doesn't like them? But I picked these out so carefully. Indeed, carefully selected. Billy still remembered the Salamanca orchids that had covered the entire banquet hall, each bloom exquisitely vibrant, some petals still glistening with morning dew. And this bouquet in front of him, the petals were already somewhat dry, likely a small, unremarkable part of the many flowers from a few days ago. Tiffany, seeing Billy not accepting the flowers for a long time, looked displeased. "Charles means well. Don't you like flowers? Hurry up and take them." The surrounding staff, seeing the situation, also chimed in. "Billy, just accept them. You probably couldn't find a second bouquet of such beautiful flowers in the whole city. Charles is truly an artist. Even the flowers he gives are exceptionally tasteful. Charles spent a fortune and it's so thoughtful. Billy, don't play hard to get. Some people from humble backgrounds are just so pretentious. Such precious flowers." And he still puts on a sour face. "You guys like them?" Billy took the flowers from Charles and tossed them to the few who had been most vocal. "Then they're yours. I have things to do, so I'll be leaving now." Tiffany, seeing Billy being so disrespectful, raised an eyebrow and gripped his wrist tightly. "What are you doing? I specially wanted to give you a surprise today. Charles is also here to celebrate with you, trying so hard to please you. What else are you dissatisfied with?" Tiffany leaned in close to his ear and whispered, "Everything I'm doing. Isn't it to elevate your status so we can be together openly sooner? What are you fussing about? Can't you understand me a little? Together openly?" Billy didn't understand how Tiffany could say such things to him while simultaneously preparing a wedding with Charles. He numbly took a step back, pulling his hand away from Tiffany's. Just then, the building's lights suddenly went out. The piercing fire alarm blared, and then the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. Chaos erupted instantly. Billy was violently shoved by someone and fell to the ground, his arms scraping against shards of a broken vase. Pain shot through him. He couldn't help but cry out, "Ah, Billy!" Tiffany's panicked voice seemed to be approaching him. "Tiffany, my head hurts so much." Charles's voice interjected at the perfect moment. Billy then heard familiar footsteps moving further and further away from him. Amidst the panicked crowd and thick smoke, he saw Tiffany helping Charles up, rushing towards the exit. Warm blood trickled down Billy's arm. That familiar voice brushed past him. An exquisite handmade high heel inadvertently grazed his fingers. It hurt. The saying "fingers are connected to the heart" was indeed true. Tiffany once said his fingers were beautiful, like those of a natural-born artist. If he could use them to hold a paintbrush, they would be even more beautiful. So, what Tiffany liked wasn't his slender fingers, but the person who held the paintbrush. Soon, power was restored to the building. Turned out to be a false alarm. But the so-called promotion celebration was left in a complete mess. Billy's fine business suit was stained with blood, looking like rags. The surrounding gossip was incessant. Just a moment ago, he was acting so tough. Now he looks like an abandoned, pathetic dog. So pitiful. Did you see how Tiffany helped Charles out just now? Total girlfriend power. What's true love? You can tell in moments of crisis like this. It's so simple. Some people want to climb the social ladder and become a phoenix, but unfortunately, it's all for nothing. Billy staggered to his feet, numbly and exhaustedly walking out of the office, leaving this place where he once held infinite expectations and dreams. Billy returned home and collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted. His phone buzzed incessantly with message notifications. "Billy, how are you? Are you home? I can't get away right now. Take good care of yourself. Billy, you have to believe me. Everything I'm doing is so we can be together properly." Billy didn't reply to any of them. He just turned off his phone and closed his eyes. He and Tiffany would never be together. Never again. Billy's injury was superficial. He recovered after a couple of days' rest. Tomorrow was the day he would leave this place. As he finished packing his suitcase, he received a message from Charles. "Don't you want to know why Tiffany bought a house in such a remote place? Look out the window, you'll find the answer." Billy looked out the window. Not far away was a red-walled, detached villa. Since they had moved in, that villa had been unoccupied. Now, a faint light shone from one of its windows. He could clearly see Charles sitting at a piano, elegantly playing music, with Tiffany standing behind him, her gaze deep and adoring. The setting sun streamed through the window, casting a halo around them, beautiful as a painting. After what seemed like a long time, Charles stood up. Tiffany embraced him, showering his neck with urgent, rain-like kisses. He naturally wrapped his arms around her neck. They embraced and kissed naturally, clothes being shed continuously. Then Billy could only see the pulled curtains and the intertwined silhouettes projected on the wall. Billy's feet felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. A chill from the bottom of his heart spread throughout his body. The sky gradually darkened, and night enveloped him. His lonely figure seemed increasingly helpless and alone. When his phone buzzed again, he saw Charles standing by the window. He was wearing thin clothes, and in the light, faint, ambiguous red and purple marks and smudged lipstick were visible. Charles wiped his lips, smiling triumphantly and ostentatiously, his showing off blatant. Billy answered the phone and heard Charles's mocking tone. "She never told you, did she? This was the villa I used to live in. This is the place Tiffany begged her friends to buy when she had nothing. Billy, when she was with you, did she often stand where you are now, looking in my direction?" Charles laughed. "You didn't actually think that when she was troubled, she was thinking about how to marry you, did you? She was thinking about me. Billy, you're the biggest fool in the world. Willingly staying by her side, being my stand-in. You're truly pathetic." Billy's body felt as if it had been electrocuted. He couldn't move. Indeed, Tiffany used to stand here alone, her eyes vacant, looking at the small window in front of him. When he tried to comfort Tiffany, he would be pressed against the window, ruthlessly possessed and conquered. At that time, was Charles also on Tiffany's mind? All these years, I should thank you for keeping her company, for helping her reach the pinnacle of success again. Now that I'm back, you should get lost. Oh, right. Charles held out his hand, showing Billy a huge diamond ring. The wedding Tiffany prepared for me is tomorrow, in W Group's largest ballroom. Everything is to my liking and full of our memories. From now on, the place by her side is mine. Charles waved at Billy, then hung up. But his unrestrained ridicule and flaunting echoed in Billy's ears. The harsh reality closing in nearly made Billy stumble. He once thought Tiffany loved him, even a little. But everything that had happened in the past half-month clearly told him that Tiffany only held his hand when she needed to, only came close to him when she needed comfort. He was like the most common, cheapest water. In the desert, Tiffany would desperately cling to him. But in an oasis, he was worthless, easily discarded and despised, no different from trash. Everything around him was quiet. His heart gradually calmed. All his feelings for Tiffany dissipated in this darkness. Billy thought he wouldn't be able to sleep, but he slept exceptionally soundly. What he didn't expect was that Tiffany returned before dawn the next day. She stared blankly at the furniture covered in white sheets. "What are you doing?" Billy calmly closed the bedroom door, also blocking the view of the suitcase behind it. "I've hired a deep cleaning service, just preparing in advance." "Is that so?" Tiffany still felt something wasn't right. "Why are you back?" Billy changed the subject. Tiffany pulled out the breakfast she had prepared from behind her. "Specially brought you breakfast." Billy didn't refuse and started eating, seemingly normal. Tiffany inexplicably breathed a sigh of relief. She took out a gemstone necklace from her pocket, put it around Billy's neck without allowing refusal, and then gently kissed him. "I know Charles's matter made you unhappy, but we have a childhood friendship. We can't just be strangers. You've been working hard lately. I've arranged a trip for you to relax. When you come back, I'll have everything sorted out. Okay?" Tiffany discreetly glanced at her watch. The wedding was about to start soon. She had to make sure Billy wouldn't show up today. "Okay, if you have things to do, go ahead." Billy nodded. Tiffany leaned in to kiss Billy's neck, but he dodged it by standing up. She paused, slightly taken aback. "I'll have the driver wait downstairs. Come down when you're ready." Okay. You. For some reason, Tiffany felt that today's Billy was different, with an inexplicable sense of distance. Billy secretly took a deep breath, a familiar smile finally appearing on his lips. He hooked her hand with his little finger. I'm a bit tired. Want to catch some more sleep? You go ahead. Tiffany finally relaxed. Billy watched Tiffany hurry away before taking off the necklace and casually tossing it on the table. He picked up his already packed luggage and documents and quietly left through the basement door, while Tiffany's driver was still waiting at the main entrance. Billy got into a taxi. Airport, thanks. He looked at the familiar scenery outside, his eyes filled with a soft, relieved expression. Goodbye forever, Tiffany. Tiffany stood outside W Group's ballroom, wearing a beautiful custom wedding dress, smiling and greeting guests, but an inexplicable unease gnawed at her. Billy's strange behavior this morning kept replaying in her mind. Yet, every word he said was as calm as usual, as if nothing was wrong. As the wedding time drew nearer, Tiffany's eye began to twitch. The unease in her heart spread, until her phone rang, snapping her back to reality. It was the driver. Tiffany answered. Tiffany, Billy hasn't come down yet. Is today's trip canceled? He hasn't come down yet? Tiffany's brow furrowed. Go up and check. If anything seems off, tell me immediately. Yes. Tiffany hung up and dialed Billy's number, but all she heard was the cold, mechanical voice. The number you have dialed is unavailable, over and over again. That strange feeling in Tiffany's heart grew, and her chest began to heave violently. No, something's wrong. Tiffany started walking. She had a strong, bad premonition. Tiffany. Charles, dressed in a suit and meticulously groomed, took her arm. It's time. Let's go in. Tiffany looked at Charles, somewhat dazed. His face wore a pure, innocent smile, looking at her with complete happiness, just like 5 years ago. This was the man she had desperately tried to win. She nodded, as if possessed, forcefully suppressing the agitation in her heart. She walked with Charles into the venue amidst the envy and blessings of the crowd. But Tiffany seemed oblivious to it all. Her attention was solely on the phone in her pants pocket. They stood in the center of the venue. The expensively hired MC recited generic blessings and vows, also reminiscing about her and Charles's past. At this moment, Tiffany's mind was filled with Billy's face after that wedding 5 years ago. When she was at her lowest, only Billy came to see her. Tiffany, do you take Charles, here present, to be your lawfully wedded husband, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? Do you? Tiffany's phone suddenly vibrated. She answered it under everyone's astonished gaze. Tiffany, Billy seems to be gone, the driver said cautiously. What? Tiffany's heart pounded violently. Her breathing became ragged. There's nothing in the room except the furniture. All of Billy's things are gone. The driver paused, then continued, Oh, Billy left a gemstone necklace. Gone. Tiffany's hand holding the phone trembled violently. All of Billy's recent oddities replayed in her mind like a movie. Tiffany. Charles gently tugged at Tiffany's sleeve. You? Tiffany suddenly turned, looked at Charles for a moment, then said, Sorry. She turned and ran out of the venue as fast as she could, completely oblivious to the calls and chaos behind her. Tiffany returned to her and Billy's home. All she saw was white. She didn't bother checking the expensive gemstone necklace on the table but rushed into their bedroom. Billy. The bedroom was filled with sunlight, but it was empty. The water glass and alarm clock Billy usually kept by the bed were gone. The calming incense he always prepared for her was also gone. No, it can't be. Tiffany frantically opened the closet. Empty. Nothing. It was so clean, as if no one had ever lived there. Not a trace. This is impossible. Tiffany stubbornly shook her head, walking through every room, trying to find any evidence that Billy hadn't left, but she found nothing. This house, which should have been full of life, had become cold and unfamiliar, even emptier than when they first moved in. Tiffany looked at the furniture covered in white sheets. She mocked her own stupidity. How could she have believed Billy's clumsy excuse this morning? She clearly had a chance to prevent all this. Just then, the door opened. Tiffany's eyes suddenly lit up. She knew he hadn't left. He was just angry, just trying to scare her. Billy, hey, someone's here? Didn't they say it was already moved out? A complaining voice sounded from the doorway. The newcomer was a middle-aged man, followed by workers in moving company uniforms. Who are you? Tiffany asked, her voice hoarse. I'm the owner of this house. You must be the former owner, right? The man said matter-of-factly. We agreed on the price. Don't even think about backing out. The owner of this house. Tiffany couldn't even find her voice. Billy sold the house? This is impossible. Impossible. Tiffany suddenly lunged at the middle-aged man like a madwoman, forcefully pushing him out. Billy wouldn't sell the house. This is our home. Get out. Get out. Hey, who do you think you are? I said get out. Didn't you hear me? Tiffany screamed hysterically, as if by driving the man away, this would still be her and Billy's home, and he would come back. Until her phone pinged with a notification. She opened it with a flicker of hope. It was a deposit alert, and the amount was exactly half of the original house price. Her arm dropped limply. This cold string of numbers seemed to tell her that the last remaining tie between her and Billy was gone. The middle-aged man seized the opportunity and waved his hand, instructing the movers to escort her out of the house. Tiffany mechanically held her phone, dialing Billy's number over and over again, messaging him on WhatsApp, and trying every contact method she knew, but received no response. At this moment, Tiffany felt as if she were reliving the desperation of 5 years ago. An invisible wound in her heart was tearing open, bit by bit. She ran to every place connected to Billy, searched for everyone who might have a connection to him, all in vain. When Charles saw Tiffany again, she was slumped dejectedly in her office. She was still wearing the custom wedding dress from the ceremony, now wrinkled and smelling of sweat. Her hair was a mess, and dark circles of exhaustion ringed her eyes. She looked utterly haggard. Charles bit his lower lip and knocked on the door. Billy! Tiffany whipped her head around. Seeing it was Charles, the disappointment in her eyes was unmistakable. Hatred seethed in Charles's heart. That bastard Billy, even when leaving, had to choose their wedding day. Was it to show his importance, or to deliberately jinx him? That day, Charles was left humiliated at the wedding, laughed at by everyone. All his embarrassment was because of that bastard Billy. If he ever found out where Billy was, he wouldn't let him off the hook. Charles smoothed the ferocious expression from his face and walked towards Tiffany step by step, carefully crouching in front of her. He spoke in the gentlest voice. Tiffany, are you abandoning me? Tiffany looked up. The man before her was the one she had pursued for so long. Those large, tear-filled eyes were what she cherished most. But now, her mind was filled only with the frustration and chaos of not being able to find Billy. Charles, I'm sorry. I messed up the wedding. I'll make it up to you later. Can you go home first, please? Charles shook his head, resting it on Tiffany's knee. Tiffany, let me stay with you. Okay? Tiffany stood up, pushing Charles further away. Charles, I have something very important to do right now. Be sensible. I'll spend time with you after I'm done. Okay? No. Charles suddenly threw himself into Tiffany's arms, shaking his head somewhat violently. I'm scared alone. I'll have nightmares. I'll worry if Tiffany is going to leave me. Just let me stay by your side. Please? Okay. Large tears rolled down Charles's cheeks. I'll just stay with you. I won't talk. I won't bother you. Is that not okay either? Tiffany's heart softened. She took a deep breath but still pushed Charles away. Be good. I don't want to be good. Charles seemed to be throwing a tantrum. Tiffany grew increasingly frustrated, her patience wearing thin. She pushed Charles away more forcefully. His body hit the desk, and the laptop fell off. The screen lit up, stopping exactly on the messaging app window. Tiffany suddenly remembered that when she was chatting with her bestie, her computer's messaging app was logged in. She only realized it after finishing the chat and logged out. And all of Billy's strange behavior seemed to have started from that day. So Billy knew all along. Tiffany felt as if she'd been struck by lightning, her eyes wide. She instantly remembered when she and Billy first got together. He was always filled with insecurity. Even when they were hugging, he would hold her waist tightly. She asked him what was he afraid of. He said it wasn't fear, just that he loved her so much, so he cherished every single second. She smiled and kissed his forehead. Silly, we'll be together always, always. We have a lifetime. He held her tighter. You won't lie to me, right? I won't. Never. The promises of the past were vivid in her mind. It was Tiffany who had broken her vow. It was she who, after gradually emerging from her lowest point and once again standing at the top, looking down on Billy, had slowly forgotten that for 5 years, he had been the one to walk her out of the mud, step by step. It was she who had gotten used to Billy being there for her, no matter the cost. It was she who arrogantly thought that as long as she gave him a little sweetness, he would never leave. But she had forgotten that Billy had his own pride and emotional fastidiousness. Perhaps she hadn't forgotten. It was just that when Charles appeared, she subconsciously wanted to ignore Billy's principles. She greedily wanted to have Charles while also holding on to Billy. So Billy left. He left cleanly, without giving her any chance to keep him. He abandoned everything and he abandoned her. Tiffany sank onto the soft carpet. Yet she clearly felt a chill creep over her entire body. It was only then that she realized she had failed the person who loved her most in the world. She was the utter fool. It was her fault, her greed, her attempt to gloss over the problems and have it all. She had so many apologies she wanted to say to Billy. If only she could see him, even if she had to kneel before him, admit her mistakes, beg for forgiveness, she would do it willingly. But now, she didn't even know where he was. Tiffany slammed her hand down on the laptop. Veins bulged on her thin hand. Her eyes were fierce. She would find Billy. She definitely would. She would go to him, use every method possible to apologize, to beg for his forgiveness, even if it took a lifetime. She was willing. Charles watched Tiffany's constantly changing expressions and quietly clenched his fists. Billy took the money from selling his shares and house and went to a remote orphanage. He had grown up there. In today's rapidly developing world, this place seemed forgotten by time. Communication was still not very convenient. Even cell phone signals were spotty. But this didn't bother Billy. There was no air conditioning, but the air was fresh. In the morning, you could smell the distinct scent of dew. In the evening, a short walk to the nearby mountain offered a breathtaking sunset. Falling in love with this place was incredibly easy. He changed out of his stiff business suits and into comfortable sportswear. With his makeup removed, he felt much more relaxed. There were quite a few children in the orphanage. He distributed the textbooks he brought from the city and started teaching them systematically, giving them a chance to leave this place and see a world they had never known. Billy sat on the swing in the yard, watching the children chase a soccer ball. Sweat beaded on everyone's foreheads, but their faces were beaming with happy smiles. He couldn't help but smile along with them. Somehow, the soccer ball veered out of control and headed straight for Billy. By the time he reacted, it was too late. He instinctively closed his eyes but was caught in a warm, strong embrace, followed by a muffled grunt. He quickly opened his eyes and looked up into a sunny, smiling face. Her features were striking, and her tan skin made her smile very approachable. "Are you okay?" Billy shook his head. "I should be asking if you're okay." "Thank you." The other person awkwardly scratched her head. "It's nothing. You must be the new teacher, Billy, right?" "I'm Winnie. You can just call me Winnie." Winnie pointed to the town at the foot of the mountain. "I live down there." "Winnie." Billy was touched by Winnie's simplicity and smiled too. "Do you come here often?" "Yeah, when I have nothing else to do, I play with the kids." Winnie looked at Billy, her cheeks slightly flushed. "You just got here. Want me to show you around?" Billy wanted to say he used to live here too, but he had been away for too many years and it did feel unfamiliar. So he nodded. Winnie took Billy around the town on her bicycle. When they got tired, they ate at a small local restaurant nearby. The food tasted just as Billy remembered. Chatting, Billy learned that Winnie, who looked like a college student, was almost 30. She had left here years ago to make her own way in the world and had only returned 3 years ago. She spoke with depth and insight but was a bit shy. They sat by the river, looking across. The other side was completely different from the small town, with towering skyscrapers, shuttling subways, and bustling crowds. A gentle evening breeze blew past, and Billy felt that life on the other side was already very, very far away from him. So far it felt like a previous lifetime. Just then, a video started playing on a large screen on a building across the river. The video featured a sharp, capable man, his exquisite makeup making him exceptionally charismatic. When the video ended, Tiffany's face appeared. The screen kept scrolling her spoken words in large text, clear enough to read even from a distance. Billy, it was my arrogance, my failure to appreciate your years of devotion. Will you come back, please? If you come back, I promise I'll bring you home. I'll give you the wedding you want. Forgive me, please? If you forgive me, I'll do anything you ask. Billy was stunned. No one knew better than him how much Tiffany cared about her image, yet she was doing something so outrageous. He didn't know in how many cities this video was playing, nor what consequences Tiffany's actions would bring. He only knew that Tiffany's current apology and humility didn't move him. What lingered in his heart was only a sense of powerlessness from having his peace disturbed. Billy turned his head awkwardly, wanting to say something to Winnie, but not knowing how to begin. Let's go back. Winnie's face still wore a sunny smile. The roads in town are hard to navigate at night. She didn't ask anything, which made Billy very grateful. He really didn't want to be questioned about his past. By the time they reached the orphanage, it was completely dark. Billy waved goodbye to Winnie. Billy, Winnie called out to him. Do you need a computer? Huh? Communication here isn't great, and people aren't very interested in what's happening outside. If you want to know what's going on out there, you might need a computer. Winnie asked again. I have a computer at home. Do you need it? Need it? For a moment, this question truly stumped Billy. Just now, sitting by the river, he had desperately wanted to know what crazy things Tiffany had done, and he wanted her to take down those ridiculous videos. But now, standing here, with the gentle evening breeze ruffling his hair, and the occasional sound of children's pre-bedtime play drifting into his ears, he felt a sense of clarity. Billy shook his head. No, I don't. He and Tiffany couldn't go back to the past. Her apologies, her promises, meant nothing to him anymore. He liked his current life. This was what he wanted. The Billy in the video, the business elite, was what Tiffany needed, but that wasn't the real him. Winnie's smile seemed to deepen. She waved goodbye and rode off on her bicycle, her cheerful whistling audible even from a distance. Tiffany knelt before Thomas. The recently tailored suit looked oversized on her. Ever since Billy left, whenever Tiffany closed her eyes, all she saw was his smile that morning, followed by his retreating figure that she couldn't catch. That fear of loss, like an inescapable vine, tightly enveloped her. Countless invisible, sharp thorns pierced her heart, impossible to remove, yet agonizingly painful. She could only numb herself with alcohol and tobacco, drinking until she passed out, numbing herself until she lost consciousness. Only then would her pain lessen. Thomas's cane landed heavily on Tiffany's back. His granddaughter had been acting outrageously recently, even developing an aversion to food, vomiting whatever she ate. If this continued, the group CEO he had painstakingly cultivated would be ruined. You wretched thing, pining away for a man. What a disgrace. The CEO of W Group, begging for forgiveness in videos played in every city. Do you know how much W Group stock has fallen? Do you know how dissatisfied W Group's shareholders are with you? Are you going to throw away 5 years of hard work? Each of Thomas's rebukes was followed by a heavy blow from his cane. Tiffany's thin back trembled uncontrollably, but she didn't utter a sound. You are the CEO of W Group. You can have any man you want. I only want him, Tiffany gritted out. What did you say? Thomas was so angry his body shook. I said, I only want Billy. Tiffany looked up. Grandpa, why can't you accept Billy? He loves me more than anyone. He's also very capable. Whatever he sets his mind to, he can achieve. With him by my side, W Group will surely prosper. And I will find him. When I do, Don't you dare try to stop me. Humph. Thomas snorted. The man you praise so highly, didn't he sell all his W Group shares before leaving? A whole 100 million. While you're here making a fool of yourself, he's probably living it up abroad with that money. Just a gigolo. After 5 years by your side, he still showed his true colors. You can't talk about him like that. He's not that kind of person. Tiffany suddenly stood up, the sharp pain in her back making her clench her jaw. I forced him to leave. You all forced him to leave. I won't allow you to speak of him like that anymore. Tiffany clenched her fists. She only knew Billy had sold their house, but she didn't know he had sold his shares too. Tiffany's heart clenched painfully. Billy, do you really want nothing to do with me that badly? You insolent whelp. Thomas swung his cane down hard. Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? You think you're all grown up now? I can build you up, and I can tear you down. W Group has plenty of obedient young people. Thomas had thought that even if Tiffany was heartbroken by Billy's departure, she wouldn't act too outrageously. Over time, she would accept other men, just as she had found Billy shortly after Charles left years ago. But as time went on, Tiffany's behavior and lifestyle became increasingly erratic. W Group stock had already been affected, forcing Thomas to intervene. The cane struck Tiffany's forehead. She didn't flinch or avoid it, taking the blow directly. Blood trickled down from her forehead, obscuring her vision, but she didn't wipe it away. Grandpa, you were the one who disrespected him first. Tiffany met Thomas's gaze. I worked hard for 5 years to secure my position as CEO of W Group. If I can't even protect the man by my side, what right do I have to ask for his forgiveness, to ask him to come back? Grandpa, one day I will bring him back. Whether you approve or not, I will do it. You insolent thing, get out, get out. Thomas was furious, his chest heaving violently. The people around him, their faces pale with fright, rushed to support him. Tiffany was eventually thrown out. She knew how important Thomas's support was to her, but she knew even more clearly that if her current stance wavered even slightly, she would have no chance of getting Billy back. After leaving Thomas's villa, Tiffany went to Charles's gallery. After much thought, she still felt she should give Charles an explanation and draw a clear line between them. But when she arrived at the gallery, she found that none of the staff were there. She went directly to Charles's temporary break room. The door was ajar. Before she even got close, she heard lewd, entangled sounds coming from inside. Tiffany's legs felt rooted to the spot. She remembered how Charles had always been solicitous towards her these past few days. His watery eyes filled with deep affection and dependence on her. It was precisely because of this that Tiffany had never dared to easily provoke Charles, worried that his amnesia would worsen. When the hell are you getting out of here? Those gambling debts we owe outside can't be put off much longer. The woman's voice was familiar to Tiffany. It was the gallery manager. Every time she came, this manager was by Charles's side. Through the crack in the door, Tiffany could see a disheveled Charles entangled with the woman. Don't rush, we have to get the money first. Now she's like a lost soul over that bastard. I have to humor her a bit, Charles said through gritted teeth. If I'd known that bastard leaving would cause so much trouble, I wouldn't have let him off so easily. Humor her? Until when? The woman, somewhat dissatisfied, grabbed the back of Charles's head and bit his neck hard. Didn't you say you were her first love? Back then, when you framed her and ran off with the jewels, ditching the wedding, she couldn't even bring herself to blame you. How come you're losing to some lowlife now? Tiffany's eyes turned crimson. Her hands clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. The constant pain the only thing stopping her from rushing in. Charles hadn't lost his memory. He remembered everything. He came back just for the money. Ah, you're so bad. Charles didn't dodge, instead nestling into the woman's embrace. Well, women, what they can't have is always the best. She needs a few days to grieve what she's lost. Just wait a little longer. Let me comfort her. The two became entangled again, their frantic and desperate movements no different from dogs mating in the street. Tiffany's eyes were filled with a cold, dark gloom. How utterly stupid could she have been to believe Charles again, to think he was an innocent little lamb. Even during their intimate moments, she had been exceptionally careful. Tiffany furiously smashed a nearby fire alarm. The sprinklers in the room activated, drenching the entangled pair. As they screamed, Tiffany had already grabbed a fire extinguisher and swung it fiercely. Tiffany. Charles, panic-stricken, grabbed clothes to cover himself, while the woman beside him had already hidden under the bed. Charles, bracing himself, hugged Tiffany. Tiffany, listen to my explanation. Explain what? Explain why you were with another woman, or explain why you didn't lose your memory. Tiffany's lips curled into a chilling smile, but her eyes were crimson. Charles's heart pounded. How long had she been standing outside the door? How much had she heard? It's not like that. Charles bit his lower lip, resorting to his usual sob story. I didn't lie to you. I only just got my memory back. You've been in a bad mood lately, so I didn't tell you. And her. Charles's eyes reddened. It's not what you think. I love you. Love? You? You're not even worthy of mentioning that word. Tiffany shoved Charles away and angrily threw the fire extinguisher at the manager. The manager, dazed from the hit, was about to stand up when Tiffany pinned her down, raining down punches with all her fury. Charles had never seen such a ferocious beast like Tiffany. If this continued, someone would die. Charles scrambled and crawled to grab Tiffany's arm. Tiffany, stop hitting her. There's really nothing between us. You know what kind of person I am, right? You have to believe me. Okay? Person. Tiffany, panting, looked at Charles. His tears now were no different from before, yet she found them exceptionally disgusting. What kind of person you are, I'll find out. Tiffany, somewhat unsteady, stood up and grabbed Charles by the chin. You better hope I don't find out you did anything to hurt Billy. Otherwise, I'll make you understand what paying back double means. Tiffany. Charles's eyes widened slightly, fear welling up in his heart. He never imagined Tiffany would catch him cheating. Don't call me that. It's filthy. Tiffany grabbed the corner of Charles's shirt, wiped the blood from her fist, and then walked out of the break room. She took out her phone and dialed. Find out everything Charles has been doing abroad all these years. I also need to know if he did anything to Billy, and I want it fast. Soon, Charles's investigation file was in Tiffany's hands. She sat in a dark, unlit room, silently crushing the file in her hand until it deformed, the crackling sound exceptionally jarring in the quiet room. Tiffany, is that you? In the darkness, Charles reached out, terrified, fumbling around, but he couldn't find Tiffany. Tiffany's eyes were filled with intense anger. She said nothing. She was waiting to see Charles's true colors. Soon, Charles, who had been fumbling around, stopped. He curled up, trembling slightly. Tiffany, where are you? Let me go first. We can talk things over slowly. Charles's voice was still the gentle and endearing tone Tiffany was familiar with, but it carried a distinct note of urgency. Tiffany remained silent, her eyes in the darkness growing even more obscure and unreadable. After a while, Charles began to convulse violently, his hands unconsciously gripping his arms. The fair skin soon showed purplish bruises, but he seemed oblivious, gripping himself even harder. Tiffany, let me go. Please, I beg you. Tiffany moved. She stood up and slowly walked towards him. The lights suddenly turned on, the harsh glare flooding the empty room. The overly cold white space made Charles convulse even more violently. Tiffany kept a careful distance. Charles couldn't reach her, but she could see his every subtle expression. His usually exquisitely made-up face was covered in moisture. It was unclear if it was tears or snot. The cosmetic contact lenses he wore had slipped to the corners of his eyes. His usually smooth hair was disheveled from his own frantic pulling, making him look wretched and abject. Charles, unsure what was ailing him, clenched his hands and began to scratch his skin incessantly, leaving behind red marks. Tiffany, let me go, quickly, let me go. Charles was weak all over but struggled to crawl towards Tiffany. His trembling, convulsing hands and bloodshot eyes making him look as ferocious as a wild beast. Tiffany's face showed no pity. She crouched in front of Charles, looking at him for a long time before speaking. Is this how it feels? What are you talking about? Let me go, let me go. Charles's tone became harsh. Tiffany, I said let me go. Did you hear me? When you deliberately let Billy see us being intimate, when you flaunted my affection for you to him, when you looked at him, is this how I feel now? Tiffany's voice was chilling, filled with a strange, vengeful pleasure. Tiffany shook her head. No, that's not right. This feeling isn't enough. You're not suffering enough, and I'm not satisfied enough. Billy still hasn't forgiven me, hasn't come back. Charles struggled to understand Tiffany's words. After a while, his eyes widened. You know everything? Tiffany's cold voice sounded like it was laced with ice. I found out too late. She never imagined that while she was trying to find a way to have it all, the Charles she thought was pure and wonderful was doing everything he could to make Billy witness her betrayal. She couldn't imagine how heartbroken Billy must have been, full of beautiful hopes for the future, only to see her preparing a wedding for Charles, see her embracing and kissing Charles intimately, entangled with him. Worse, she was completely oblivious to it all. When she learned the whole truth, regret and self-blame nearly overwhelmed her. The unspeakable pain made it hard for her to breathe. Only then did she realize how worthless her cheap apologies and pleas for forgiveness were. Tiffany, what on earth do you want? Charles's eyes were now bloodshot, his face contorted. I want you to taste suffering too. Tiffany looked at Charles without a shred of pity. But you have no feelings, you can't taste heartache. So, feel the extreme physical reaction instead. After all, this is, in a way, your own choice. After saying this, Tiffany stood up and slowly backed away. The gallery Charles nominally ran was just a front for him to get back to her. Over the years, Charles had squandered his family fortune, become addicted to illegal drugs, and his private life was a complete mess. To get a continuous supply of illicit drugs, he would do anything, just like now. Charles felt as if countless ants were gnawing at his body. Like a starving mad dog, he laboriously crawled towards Tiffany, trying to grab her pant leg, but Tiffany dodged him. Tiffany, please give it to me. Charles had no dignity left. As long as you give me a little bit, I'll do anything you ask. Really, I can do a lot for you. Charles tugged at his clothes. I'll give myself to you, okay? I beg you. I'll kowtow to you, I beg you. Charles, in the throes of withdrawal, couldn't think straight, only instinctively pleading, his head repeatedly hitting the floor with thudding sounds. Soon his forehead was bruised. Tiffany watched, unmoved. This was all Charles's deserved retribution. And her retribution was to continue searching for Billy amidst endless self-blame and guilt. That night, Charles was dumped at the police station entrance. He was already incoherent, covered in filth, and reeked horribly. It was impossible to tell if he was covered in excrement, urine, or snot and tears. More importantly, he kept tearing at his clothes and flesh, like a crazed beast. Even though Charles's family had fallen from grace, such a scandal still spread like wildfire, completely destroying Charles's image as an artistic dreamboat. Tiffany launched a massive, costly campaign to find Billy. Anyone who could provide a clue would receive a generous reward. She also promised that whoever found Billy would receive a one-time thank you payment of $5 million. The news caused a huge uproar. W Group stock plummeted again. Shareholder meetings were held back-to-back, and at every single one, they unanimously voted to remove Tiffany from her position as CEO. Tiffany worked even harder than in the past 5 years, constantly navigating various networks, attending social events and banquets. As long as it didn't conflict with her search for Billy, she accepted all invitations. The number of times she was hospitalized also increased, but she didn't give up, because this was the position Billy had fought for her with all his might. She had to hold onto it firmly, at least until he returned. Tiffany woke up in the hospital, pressing hard on her cramping stomach, her face pale, her limbs weak. She struggled to grab her constantly ringing phone and answered. In the past month, she had answered countless calls and received countless so-called clues. Each time she was full of hope, only to be disappointed again and again. Now, every time she heard the phone ring, her heart instinctively ached, but she refused to miss even the slightest possibility. Hello, hello. A cheerful boy's voice came from the other end. Are you looking for Billy? Do you have any leads? Tiffany's voice was hoarse, not particularly excited, as she had heard too many such opening lines. I know where he is, the boy on the other end said confidently. He's hiding in our town. He looks different from the video you posted, changed his style, but he's still very handsome. Really? Tiffany shot up, only to fall back onto the bed due to weakness. Tell me where he is now. Our town is small and hard to find. I'll give you an address. Come find me and I'll take you to him. The boy added cautiously, but you'd better come alone and quietly. Billy doesn't seem to want to be disturbed by you. If he finds out beforehand and hides again, I won't be able to find him either. Okay. Tiffany nodded repeatedly. I'll listen to you. I'll do whatever you say. The boy hung up decisively without mentioning money, which made Tiffany somewhat believe him. She also suddenly remembered Billy saying a long time ago that he came from a small town, abandoned at an orphanage doorstep. If he ever had the means, he hoped to give back to the orphanage. Tiffany smacked herself hard on the head. She couldn't help but blame herself. Why hadn't she asked a few more questions back then? Why hadn't she thought sooner about how nostalgic Billy was? Indeed, she paid too little attention to Billy, owed him too much. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like a jerk. Tiffany, forcing her unwell body, went to that small town, a mere speck on the map. The moment she stepped into it, she had a strong premonition. Billy was here. He was right here. This place was exactly as he had described. Beautiful scenery, slightly sweet air, and a gentle breeze. Are you Tiffany? A boy who looked only 12 or 13 bounced up to Tiffany. His curious little face tilted up. You know me? Tiffany's heart beat faster and faster. The little boy nodded. I've seen Billy looking at your photo, so I remember. He was looking at my photo? Tiffany, agitated, gripped the little boy's shoulders. He's thinking of me too, right? He still cares about me, right? He's waiting for me. Ouch! The little boy frowned. Tiffany quickly let go and stepped back. I'm sorry. I lost my composure. I know you must miss Billy a lot, right? The little boy looked up, his face full of innocence. I'll take you to see Billy. He should smile when he sees you, right? Yes. Tiffany nodded firmly. Quick, take me to him. I promise, from now on, I'll only make him smile, never make him sad or wronged again. The little boy didn't hesitate, bouncing towards the deeper part of the town. Tiffany followed without hesitation, the anticipation and hope welling in her chest making her heart beat faster and faster. So fast she could hear the agitated thumping herself. The child led Tiffany for a long time. The number of pedestrians dwindled until no one was in sight. Tiffany stopped, looking suspiciously at the little boy. Are you lost? Why do you think you could never find Billy? The little boy pointed to an old building not far away. We all live there. The signal is bad there. Sometimes you can't even make a phone call, let alone watch any videos. I only saw your message by chance when I went to town to play. The little boy tilted his head. Don't you believe me? I believe you. Tiffany nodded. Ever since Billy left, she had released countless videos and messages, just to ensure that every city would bear traces of her apology and search. If he wasn't hiding in a place like this, she should have found Billy long ago. The little boy looked at Tiffany for a long time, as if trying to guess whether her belief was genuine or not. After a while, he spoke again. If you want to find someone, go up yourself. With that, the little boy walked away without looking back, clearly somewhat dejected. Tiffany couldn't bother to comfort the little boy. She hurried towards the old building. Panting, Tiffany arrived at the door, her chest heaving violently. She raised her hand, wanting to knock, but a sense of unease and timidity rose within her. She didn't know if Billy would forgive her, if he... Tiffany was kicked into the doorway. She fell heavily to the ground, stirring up thick dust. Cough, cough. She looked around and realized the place was dilapidated, covered in dust and cobwebs. Clearly not a place where anyone would live. That little brat. Really thinks he's some big romantic hero? Playing Chase the Wife to the crematorium? A burly man, silhouetted against the light at the entrance, spat contemptuously. The little boy who had led Tiffany there stood behind her. Now his sleeves were rolled up to his shoulders, his white, innocent-looking shirt tied in a knot below his chest, revealing a navel piercing with a metal stud. He chewed gum and snorted. Are all rich people from outside this stupid? They believe anything you tell them. You lied to me? Tiffany's eyes widened. She shot up. You said he changed his style but was still handsome. You even said he looked at my photos. Made it up. The little boy's eyes held no clarity, only greed. If I didn't make it sound real, how would you have come here alone with me? The burly man stepped forward, grabbing Tiffany's collar. Deeply in love, CEO, huh? Hand over everything valuable and transfer me $5 million, and I'll let you go. Otherwise, his foul-smelling palm patted Tiffany's cheek. I'll make sure you never leave this town. Tiffany's gaze darted between the big man and the little boy, gradually shifting from confusion to bewilderment, then to disappointment and anger. She clenched her fist and threw the first punch, as if venting. Why did you lie to me? The big man was hit and loosened his grip. Tiffany also stumbled back until her waist slammed hard against a broken table, stopping her. Pain instantly shot through her, but she seemed oblivious, just glaring at them with bloodshot eyes. Damn it, you dare to fight back? The big man cursed. I'll kill you today. Lied to me, why? Why did you lie to me? Tiffany, ignoring the severe pain in her body, charged again, punching hard. No technique, just a desperate release of energy. Her words a more sorrowful question each time. Why did you lie to me? Damn it! The big man, enraged, violently threw her to the ground, pinned her down, and rained heavy blows on Tiffany's jaw and head. Again and again, Tiffany's vision began to blur, her consciousness fading, but she instinctively struggled, still uttering, "Why did you lie to me? Stop!" A sharp command rang out and people rushed in. Tiffany lay on the ground, unable to move, her swollen eyes slightly narrowed. Through her blood-smeared, blurry vision, she thought she saw Billy's figure. "Billy, is that you?" Tiffany's outstretched hand fell heavily to the ground. "She's not badly hurt, mostly superficial wounds. As long as there's no concussion, she should be fine." Winnie, seeing the big man and the little boy subdued, briefly checked Tiffany's injuries. Billy's gaze fell on Tiffany. She had lost a lot of weight and looked much more disheveled, even worse than 5 years ago. She was a business elite. What kind of scams hadn't she seen? Yet she fell for these two, and one was just a 12 or 13-year-old kid. Send her to the hospital. Billy knew Tiffany too well and knew what she wanted to say now that she had chased him here. But those things no longer mattered to him. The rights and wrongs of the past couldn't hide Tiffany's reservations about his gig model background and her judgment of love. Her regret wasn't because she loved him, but because of the sudden loss. Billy recalled the feeling of powerlessness, of his peace being shattered, when he received Winnie's message earlier. It far outweighed any longing for Tiffany or expectation for their relationship. He understood. Tiffany was out of the picture for him. Billy nodded. "Yes, sorry to trouble you." Winnie's simple, sunny face showed a rare moment of daze. "Aren't you going with her?" Billy shook his head. "I'm not a doctor. My presence won't help her injuries at all." Winnie looked at Billy, silent for a moment. "What's wrong? Is something amiss?" Billy asked. "I thought you'd be moved, that you'd go back with her." Winnie said frankly, "You two must have a lot of history, and you should have a better life." "What should a better life look like?" Billy smiled. "Is it eating $10,000 gourmet meals in a Michelin star restaurant, or wearing haute couture gowns, holding champagne flutes, and mingling in so-called high society?" Winnie shrugged. "Shouldn't it be like that? I've indeed experienced that kind of life, and I once tried very hard to fit in. But, looking back, Billy felt as if it were a lifetime ago. Dress shoes pinch, red wine is sour, designer clothes are restrictive, and private chefs never quite satisfy. It's not as comfortable and pleasant as life in this small town. Don't you think?" Billy tilted his head and asked with a smile. He didn't know Winnie's past. Here, she either spent her days with the orphanage children or explored the town's beauty. When idle, she'd just sit in her yard and daze off, never having to hustle for a living. Her unspoken past was probably more exciting than many people's experiences. Winnie didn't answer, her eyes returning to their usual clarity, her smile still sunny. Tiffany was taken to the hospital. She vaguely thought she heard Billy's voice, but when she woke up and frantically grabbed anyone she could see to ask, the answers were all negative. She could only dejectedly loosen her grip and fall back onto the soft hospital bed, muttering, "So it was just a dream. I still haven't found you, no." She would never know that Billy had once been within her reach, just like the days and nights of the past 5 years. Tiffany used every means possible. The news of her search even reached the streets of foreign countries. She wanted to ensure Billy would see her messages no matter where he went. He didn't appear simply because he hadn't forgiven her yet. So she decided to go all in, to give Billy the wedding he had long awaited, a wedding that defied everyone's opposition. This was the determination she wanted to show him. Her friends and Bestie all thought she was crazy. "Bestie, you've been at this for so long, spent so much money. It should be enough. That man clearly isn't coming back. Why bother with such a bizarre wedding? Do you know that live streaming the whole thing means everyone can see it? If Billy shows up, you're the devoted, good woman. If he doesn't, you're just putting your face on the ground for everyone to stomp on. You're the CEO of W Group. You can't afford the consequences of doing this." "I can afford it." Tiffany carefully caressed the wedding dress before her. "As long as there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that Billy knows my determination and resolve, as long as he can forgive me, I can bear any consequence." "You're simply insane. What if he doesn't? Then I'll keep searching until I can't search anymore." Tiffany's tone was unprecedentedly firm. She had never been so clear about what she truly wanted. The live-streamed wedding proceeded as scheduled. People all over the world could see the splendor and meticulous planning of the venue. The flowers were hydrangeas, Billy's favorite, fresh and bright. Not particularly expensive, but there were enough of them to cover the entire wedding site. Even the soft carpet was thickly laden with hydrangeas. Champagne and food were all prepared. At the entrance to the wedding, there was also a huge photo. Tiffany and Billy didn't have wedding photos, so she printed a picture from 5 years ago of him standing beside her, his head slightly raised, looking at her with a shy, focused gaze. The photo was inanimate, but the Billy in the photo was alive. The deep affection in his eyes was completely undisguised. Tiffany, wearing a custom 3-piece wedding suit, stood in the center of the wedding. Beside her was the elaborate suit she had prepared for Billy. A corner of fabric tucked into her wedding jacket pocket came from its material. She wanted Billy to know that everything about her would be, and only be, connected to him. As the wedding progressed, the vast venue still held only Tiffany, alone and desolate. She felt time slipping away, and with it, her hope. No one knew the torment and anguish she was enduring. Just as the wedding was scheduled to begin, the heavy doors of the venue were pushed open. Tiffany's dull, lifeless eyes suddenly lit up. She stared intently at the slowly opening doors, her hands unconsciously clutching her bouquet. He came after all. He couldn't bear to leave her alone. She knew it. As long as she expressed her apology with all her might, sought forgiveness, he would always. Upon seeing who entered, the bouquet in Tiffany's hand dropped limply to the floor. The light in her eyes vanished completely. "Hello, we are XX homicide detectives. Are you MS Tiffany?" Several uniformed detectives stepped uniformly onto the delicate hydrangeas. "I am." Tiffany's voice was dry and hoarse. "You are suspected of transporting and selling illegal drugs, and inducing others to use them. This is an arrest warrant. Please come with us." Illegal drugs? In that instant, Tiffany felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. When had she ever dealt with illegal drugs? "Officers, you must be mistaken. Haven't. Do you know a Mr. Charles?" "Yes." Tiffany nodded. "Mr. Charles turned himself in to the police yesterday and led officers to discover relevant evidence in your office and private car. He also submitted video evidence of you using violence, assaulting his girlfriend, and forcing him to use illegal drugs. Tiffany, with both human testimony and physical evidence, if you still don't confess and seek leniency, what awaits you will be the severe punishment of the law. The detective's stern voice echoed in Tiffany's ears. After a long while, Tiffany let out a bitter laugh. How utterly ironic. This was exactly like 5 years ago. The same wedding she had looked forward to with endless anticipation. The same uniformed officers. The same Charles pinning a fabricated crime on her. How ridiculous. She always thought she had it all under control, yet she kept falling in the same place time and time again. And this time, she knew clearly, there would be no naive Billy running around to prove her innocence, nor would there be anyone to accompany her from nothing. The wedding Tiffany had meticulously prepared ended up as a joke and a stain on W Group. W Group stock plummeted to an all-time low. The day after Tiffany was placed under police investigation, Thomas, as the largest shareholder, convened a shareholder meeting. At the meeting, all shareholders unanimously voted to remove Tiffany from her position as CEO of W Group. Thomas's distant grandnephew was appointed as the new CEO of W Group. A month later, Tiffany was quickly convicted. W Group also held a press conference, attended by Thomas and the new CEO. What shocked everyone was that at the banquet after the press conference that day, the person accompanying Thomas was Charles, the witness who had testified that Tiffany sold illegal drugs and forced others to use them, and who had been released on bail. He had actually become Thomas's personal assistant. That day, all the reporters aimed their cameras at Charles. He had shed his former fresh, artistic image and was dressed in very revealing, sexy attire. Faced with prying eyes, he frequently hid behind Thomas. Charles obsequiously handed a wine glass to Thomas, his tone fawning, "Grandpa, Tiffany has been convicted. Can I leave now?" "Leave? Where to?" Thomas's hand squeezed Charles's waist hard. "Can you even stay away from that stuff now? Besides me, who else can satisfy you? Money is a good thing, isn't it?" "Grandpa." Charles winced in pain but dared not pull away. He suppressed the disgust in his heart and the churning in his stomach. "But you clearly promised me. If I helped you, you'd let me go and give me—" "I did promise, but what I needed your help with was more than just this one thing." Thomas's greedy hand roamed Charles's waist. "Someone like you can help me in many other ways. After the banquet, come meet a few people with me. With your skills, you'll surely be able to serve them comfortably. And I, naturally, will give you what you want." "You?" Charles's eyes widened. This old lecher, he wanted him to— "What about me?" Thomas narrowed his eyes, full of warning. "You should be glad you're still useful to me. Otherwise, my methods for dealing with you would be even more memorable than with that kid." The thought of being discarded at the police station like a rag made Charles shiver. Thomas was even more twisted than Tiffany. Thinking of this, his attitude involuntarily softened. "Grandpa, isn't this good?" Thomas smirked, countless wrinkles crinkling together. "Utterly hideous. Whatever you want, I can afford to give you. What else are you not satisfied with? As long as you're obedient, you'll be my most treasured toy." Thomas bit out the last word heavily. She certainly knew what kind of person Charles was. He was only fit to be an amusing plaything. As long as he was sufficiently obedient, she could bestow some things upon him. And those who were disobedient could only be discarded, trampled into the abyss, just like Tiffany. "Charles, don't you think I'm right?" Charles lowered his head in silence for a moment, then took a deep breath, suppressed the urge to vomit, and forced a smile. "You're right." He handed the wine glass to Thomas's lips. "Grandpa, drink." "I don't like you calling me Grandpa." Thomas's old, yellowed eyes glinted with a lewd, sleazy light. "You should think of some other names. Names that can make me happy." Charles no longer resisted. Instead, he obediently leaned close to Thomas's ear and softly whispered 2 words. Thomas laughed even louder. The scenery of the quiet little town was beautiful, but only a very few people could see it, which was a real pity. Billy took out some money and invested in developing a relaxing travel project themed around a natural oxygen bar, attracting many tourists. Groups of backpackers, 3 or 5 at a time, admired the beautiful scenery while eagerly discussing the hottest topics of the day. Do you guys follow trending news? The W Group scandal is just one bombshell after another. Yeah, I saw. A tourist chimed in excitedly. The much talked about devoted CEO, I heard she committed a crime and has been convicted. She won't be out for at least 8 or 10 years. What a waste of such a devoted lover. What devoted lover? Don't you guys know? The one she always liked was her childhood sweetheart, the artist Charles. Artist. The most explosive part is this artist, okay? That guy's got some serious moves. Not only did he personally send Tiffany to jail, but he also immediately shacked up with her grandpa. Those two guys, there's like a 40 or 50-year age gap between them. And back in the day, Thomas even watched Charles grow up, probably changed his diapers too. Seriously? Is this gossip legit? Totally legit. What he's into now isn't art. It's just mind-blowing. Scandalous, scandalous. I wonder what kind of person that Billy, who's been searched for all this time, really is. Who cares what kind of person he is? The point is, it's good he didn't go back. True that. A group of tourists chatted and laughed, completely unaware that the Billy they were discussing was by the river, weaving handicrafts with the orphanage children. These little trinkets weren't difficult to make. They not only helped the children develop their manual skills, but also generated income for the orphanage. More importantly, tourists also loved these unique little items, so there was no worry about selling them. The rumors and gossip about W Group drifted past Billy's ears like a gentle breeze, making no difference to him. He simply focused on the straw rope in his hands. Splash! Winnie suddenly popped her head out of the river, holding a fish the size of her forearm. Billy, look, a fish. The big fish, as if unwilling to be caught so easily, thrashed vigorously, splashing water onto the children's faces, causing everyone to laugh and run around. A few younger children even rushed into Billy's arms, seeking protection. Billy laughed too. Winnie, hurry up and come out. The water's cold, don't catch a cold. Oh! Winnie obediently tossed the big fish ashore and quickly jumped out herself, her movements extremely agile. Her face beamed with its usual smile. I prepared a stove. We'll roast the fish later and eat it. Yay, Winnie, you're the best. The cheerful sounds attracted the attention of many, including those tourists. Hey, look, isn't that person Billy? No way. How could a man Tiffany is so hung up on be in such a poor little place? Exactly. That Billy is probably loaded. He's probably off having a blast somewhere abroad. Yeah, if it were me, I'd travel the world. And I'd eat all the delicious food in the world. You guys just keep dreaming.